Finally. John Smith didn't whisper it. He didn't step away from the door. He stood right there in the hospital hallway, champagne glass still in hand, and said it loud enough for the nurses at the station to hear. Priscilla, he's gone. William Smith is dead. The doctor just confirmed it. He was smiling, not the tight, polite smile of a grieving son, a real smile. The kind that comes when something you've been waiting a long time for finally arrives. Inside room 14, William lay perfectly still under the oxygen mask, IV drip ticking in the corner, monitor lines slow and steady. To everyone standing in that hallway, he looked like a man who had finally run out of time. What nobody knew, except one doctor, was that William could hear every word. He couldn't open his eyes, couldn't speak, couldn't grab his son by the collar the way everything in him was screaming to do. His body was still, his mind was not. And what his mind was registering at that moment was the sound of his family celebrating his death. Welcome, friends. Please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from. Now, let's talk about William Smith. William hadn't inherited his wealth. He had carved it out of nothing: factories, shipping routes, city blocks bought when they were still affordable. By 60, his name was on buildings in 4 countries. People didn't call him sir. They called him the chairman. But the chairman was now lying in a hospital bed, grey hair flat against the pillow, listening to his son laugh. And the most painful part, he wasn't surprised. The calls that only came when money ran low. The visits that lined up suspiciously with estate reviews. The way his wife Helen touched his arm at dinner, like she was checking whether something was still warm, not whether he was still loved. He had arranged this entire plan, the doctor, the sedative, the staged collapse, because some part of him still needed to believe he was wrong about them. He was not wrong. 6 months before the hospital room, William Smith sat at the head of a 12-seat dining table that was never fully occupied. Helen had arranged everything beautifully, as she always did: the good china, the tall candles, the flowers that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. From the outside, it looked like a family that had everything. From where William sat, it looked like a performance where everyone had forgotten to tell him the plot. John arrived 40 minutes late, jacket still on, phone still in hand. He kissed his mother on the cheek, nodded at his father the way you nod at a doorman, and sat down. Priscilla came shortly after, dropping into her chair with the energy of someone doing the room a favour by showing up at all. William watched them. He didn't say anything. He'd learned over the years that silence was the most honest tool he owned. Dinner moved through its courses. The conversation was light: television, travel, a mutual friend's recent divorce. Nobody asked William how he was feeling. Nobody asked about the chest pains that had started in October or the hospital appointment he'd mentioned twice in passing. They talked around him the way water moves around a stone, smoothly, without acknowledgement. Then John set down his fork. Dad, the shift in his voice was immediate. Lower, warmer, practiced. I've been thinking about the Abuja property, the one you've had sitting idle since 2019. I have a buyer, serious money, and I think now is the right time to move it. I just need you to authorize the transfer. William looked at his son, 40 minutes late, phone at the table. Hadn't asked about the chest pains, and now the real reason for the dinner. Priscilla chimed in before he could respond. And while we're talking business, the Lagos account. My interior firm needs a short-term injection, just to bridge the gap until the next client payment clears. It won't take long. Helen was quiet, but her eyes moved to William's face with the careful attention of someone monitoring a situation, not sharing a moment with a husband. William picked up his glass, took a slow sip of water. I'll think about it, he said. John nodded like the matter was already settled. Priscilla smiled and reached for the bread. Helen's shoulders relaxed slightly. The performance resumed: the candles, the good china, the flowers that cost too much. William sat at the head of the table and felt, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, the thing he had been refusing to feel for years. He was not their father at dinner, he was their banker. And this, the candles, the occasion, the careful warmth, was not a family gathering. It was a withdrawal. 3 weeks after the dinner, William made an appointment he told no one about. Dr. Emmanuel Osai had been William's private physician for 19 years. He had treated William's hypertension, monitored his heart, sat with him through the quiet fear of a cancer scare in 2018 that turned out to be nothing. He was not just a doctor. He was, William had come to realize, one of the only people in his life who spoke to him without an agenda waiting behind the words. William arrived at the private clinic early, before the receptionist had finished her coffee. He sat across from Emmanuel in the small consultation room and was quiet for a long moment, the way he always was before saying something that mattered. "I need your help with something," he said finally, "and I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no." Emmanuel leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Talk." William talked. He laid it out plainly, the way he had built everything in his life, without decoration, without drama. The dinner, the Abuja property, Priscilla's account. The years of calls that only came when something was needed. The way Helen watched him at the table. He talked for almost 20 minutes without stopping, and when he finished, the room was very still. "I don't want to die wondering," William said. "I need to know the truth while I can still do something about it." Emmanuel was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car moved slowly through the street. A phone rang at the reception desk and was answered. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" William placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. He had written it himself by hand the previous night. It outlined everything: the controlled sedative, the locked-in state, the monitoring parameters, the conditions under which Emmanuel would intervene. He had done his research. He knew it was possible. He knew it carried risk. He had decided the risk was worth it. Emmanuel read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at William the way a man looks at someone he both respects and worries about. "You understand what you're asking, if something goes wrong." "Then something goes wrong," William said quietly. "Emmanuel, I have built companies. I have made decisions that affected thousands of people. I have never been afraid of risk." He paused. "I am afraid of dying and never knowing whether anyone in that house ever actually loved me." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Heavier, more honest. Emmanuel picked up the paper again. Read it a third time. Then he reached for his pen, not to sign anything, not yet, but to begin asking the careful, clinical questions that meant he was already thinking about how to make it work. William felt, for the first time in months, like he had an ally. They chose a Sunday. William had suggested it. Sundays were when the family gathered most naturally, Helen's standing lunch tradition, the one she maintained with the dedication of someone who understood that appearances required maintenance. John and Priscilla would both be there. The staff would be present. There would be witnesses, which was important. A collapse with no audience served no purpose. Emmanuel had spent 2 weeks preparing. The sedative was precise, a compound that would slow William's vitals to a deeply reduced state without stopping them entirely. His breathing would become shallow, nearly imperceptible. His pulse would drop to a thread. To anyone without specialized equipment, he would appear to have lost consciousness completely. To a panicked family calling emergency services, he would appear to be dying. William had reviewed everything 3 times. He was not a man who left details to chance. That Sunday he dressed carefully. Dark trousers, a white shirt, his reading glasses on the side table. He ate a light breakfast alone in his study, and sat for a while in the silence of a house that had once felt like a home and now felt like a stage set. He thought about his father, the dirt floors, the belt tightening, the man who died before William learned what it meant to be loved without conditions. He wondered, not for the first time, whether something broken in that childhood had quietly shaped everything that followed. Then he stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked to the dining room. Lunch was already underway. Helen at one end, John checking his phone beside her, Priscilla picking at a salad and describing a boutique she'd discovered in Dubai. The conversation was the same conversation it always was, frictionless, surface level, carefully empty. William sat down, accepted a glass of water, listened for a few minutes. Then he reached into his breast pocket, pressed the small mechanism Emmanuel had given him, no larger than a coin, warm from being carried all morning, and waited. It moved through him like a tide going out. Slow, then faster. The edges of the room softened. The voices became distant, as though someone was turning down a dial. He felt his body grow heavy in the chair, his grip on the glass loosening, and he had just enough presence of mind to let it slip, the sound of it hitting the floor arriving somewhere far below him, like a stone dropped into deep water. Then the voices changed. "Dad, Dad," John's chair scraping back, Helen's sharp intake of breath, Priscilla's half-finished sentence cutting off mid-syllable. And then, clearest of all, rising above the sudden chaos of a family that believed it was watching its inheritance collapse, Helen's voice, directed not at William, but at the housekeeper standing frozen in the doorway. "Call an ambulance and call Emmanuel, he's William's doctor, he'll know what to do." She sounded composed, almost rehearsed. William noticed that too, just before the darkness settled. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. William heard it distantly, the siren dissolving into the driveway, the sharp knock of paramedic boots on the front steps, the clipped exchange of medical language over his body. Hands moved him. A neck brace. A stretcher. The cold rush of outside air as they wheeled him through the front door he had installed himself 22 years ago when the estate was new and the future still felt like something he was building toward. Then the doors closed, and the ambulance moved, and there was only the hum of the road beneath him. Emmanuel had arranged everything precisely. The receiving team at the hospital were briefed. The monitors would show what they needed to show. The paperwork would say what it needed to say. William's only task now was to remain still, remain silent and listen. He had not anticipated how good his family would be at providing material. John and Priscilla had followed in John's car. William knew this because he could hear them, not in the ambulance, but in the hospital corridor 20 minutes later, voices carrying through the thin partition between the family waiting area and the room where he lay. The hospital was private, quiet, the kind of facility where sound travelled with uncomfortable clarity. John spoke first. "We need to get ahead of this. If he doesn't make it and Emmanuel said it's not looking good, we need to move quickly on the estate before anyone starts making claims." "What kind of claims?" Priscilla's voice. "There's a cousin, and the assistant, Ada. He's mentioned her in conversation in ways I don't like. We need to make sure everything is locked down before lawyers start appearing." A pause, then Priscilla, quieter. "What about the funeral? Do we do it here or Abuja?" "Abuja makes sense. His associates are there, the press would expect it. Bigger turnout, better optics." "I can't do Abuja next week," Priscilla said flatly. "I have the Castellano event on Friday. I've been on the wait list for that dinner for 8 months. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Priscilla, I'm just saying if we have flexibility on the timing." "He's not dead yet." "But Emmanuel said." "I know what Emmanuel said." Another pause, longer this time. When John spoke again, his voice had dropped but not softened. "Just don't say anything stupid in front of Helen. She's already talking about the Lagos account and whether the freeze lifts automatically or whether we need a court order. Let her handle that part. You focus on the property transfer documents. I'll deal with the will." William lay still in the room beyond the partition. He had spent 40 years building an empire. He had negotiated with difficult men in difficult rooms on difficult terms. He believed he had seen the full range of what people were capable of when money was involved. He was still somehow not fully prepared for this. Helen came alone. That was the first thing William noticed. John and Priscilla had been in and out since morning, brief appearances, phones in hand, the kind of visits designed to be witnessed rather than felt. But Helen came in the early evening, after the corridor had quieted, after the day shift had handed over to the night staff. She came when she believed no one was paying close attention. She sat in the chair beside his bed and was quiet for a while. William could not see her. But he could feel her presence the way you feel weather, something in the air pressure changing. He heard her set her handbag down, heard the soft sound of her crossing her legs. Then her phone rang and she answered it. "Yes, I'm with him now." A pause. "No, nothing has changed. Emmanuel says it could be tonight, could be longer, they don't know." Another pause and then something shifted in her voice, a loosening like a coat being unbuttoned in a warm room. "Margaret, I'm fine, I'm really fine. I think I made my peace with this a long time ago." William stayed completely still. "The house in Cascais, yes, I've already spoken to the agent. I told her I'd confirm within the month. It's right on the water, 3 bedrooms, and the light in the photographs is just, it's everything I always wanted." She laughed softly, a real laugh, the kind William had not heard from her in years. I know it sounds, but Margaret, I have spent 31 years managing this household, managing his schedule, managing his image. I think I've earned a view of the ocean." A long pause while the other person spoke. "The children will be fine. John has been preparing for this for longer than he'll admit, and Priscilla will land on her feet, she always does." Helen's voice dropped slightly, taking on the measured tone she used when she was being careful. "The important thing right now is making sure the estate process is clean. The Lagos account, the Abuja property, if those are handled correctly in the first 30 days, everything else follows. I've already spoken to our lawyer. Quietly. Another pause. No, I'm not worried about the will. William was meticulous, but he was also predictable. He believed in family. Whatever he put in that document, he put it there when he still believed we were the people he thought we were. She said it without cruelty. That was almost the worst part. There was no malice in her voice, just the clean, certain tone of a woman who had already closed a chapter and was calmly making notes about the next one. William lay beneath the oxygen mask and felt something he had not expected to feel. Not anger, not even grief. Just the slow, settling weight of absolute clarity. He knew now, he knew everything he had come here to know. The question was no longer whether they loved him. The question was what he intended to do about it. Priscilla arrived the following morning, in a cream blouse and sunglasses she didn't remove indoors. She stayed for 9 minutes. William counted, not deliberately, but the way you count things when there is nothing else to do and the silence needs measuring. 9 minutes, one phone call taken in the corner of the room with her back turned, and then the sound of heels retreating down the corridor. She came back in the afternoon, longer this time, but not because of him. She sat in the chair Helen had occupied the night before and opened her phone with the focused energy of someone managing a crisis. Not the crisis in front of her, a different one. Colade, listen to me. Her voice was low but not quiet enough. It never was with Priscilla. She spoke the way she moved through rooms, as though space existed primarily for her convenience. I need you to call the Castellano Foundation and explain the situation. Tell them I've had a family emergency and ask whether I can still be accommodated Friday evening. Just Friday, I only need the dinner, not the full weekend. A pause. I understand it's not ideal, but this is completely out of my hands. Nobody planned for. She stopped, glanced briefly at William's bed, then away. For this, nobody planned for this. Another pause, then her voice sharpened. Colade, that dinner is the single most important networking event in the calendar. Amara Osa will be there, the Delacroix group will be there. I have spent 8 months building toward that table and I'm not going to let. She stopped herself again. Breathed. Just make the call, tell them Friday is still possible. I'll confirm by tomorrow. She hung up and sat for a moment with her phone pressed against her knee, staring at the middle distance with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. Then John appeared in the doorway, and she turned to him with immediate purpose. The Castellano dinner is Friday, she said, as though continuing a conversation already in progress. If we're looking at a service next week, it needs to be Thursday at the earliest or Monday, not the weekend. John looked at her for a long moment. We've had this conversation. I'm not being unreasonable, I'm being practical. These things require planning and my schedule. Your schedule, John repeated. Yes, my schedule, which I have worked very hard to build, and which doesn't simply pause because, she gestured toward the bed with a vague, almost impatient motion, the kind of gesture you make toward an inconvenient piece of furniture. Because of circumstances. John said nothing. He looked at their father's still form for a moment, then back at his sister, then left the room without a word. Priscilla turned back to her phone. William lay beneath the oxygen mask and thought about a word he had never applied to his own daughter before. Stranger. She was a stranger to him, had been for years perhaps. He had simply refused to see it. She came at night when the corridor was empty. William had heard the shift change at 10, the quiet handover of clipboards, the soft squeak of rubber soles on polished floors. The family had gone home. Helen to her plans, John to his documents, Priscilla to whatever version of grief fit her schedule. The room had been empty for nearly 2 hours when he heard the door open slowly, the way people open doors when they are uncertain of their welcome. Ada. He recognized her footsteps before anything else. 22 years of hearing them in his house had made them as familiar as his own heartbeat, that particular unhurried rhythm, deliberate and quiet, the walk of someone who had learned early that moving carefully through spaces was a form of survival. She had worked for William since she was 19. She managed his personal correspondence, his appointments, the 1,000 invisible details that kept his life organized. She was, by every formal definition, his employee. But there had been moments, a conversation held too long, a silence shared comfortably, a small kindness remembered after everyone else had forgotten, when William had understood that Ada was something the rest of his family had never managed to be. Present, genuinely, simply present. She sat in the chair beside his bed and said nothing for a long time. He heard her set something on the side table, something small, placed carefully. He couldn't know what it was. He would find out later that it was a photograph. The two of them at the opening of the Carno factory, 2011. She had framed it herself. Then she cried. Not the managed, performative kind of crying that announces itself and waits to be acknowledged. This was the other kind, quiet and reluctant, the kind that comes when someone has been holding something for days and the body simply decides it has held enough. She didn't speak. She didn't ask for anything. She just sat beside him in the dark and wept with the unguarded honesty of someone who had no audience in mind. William felt it move through him like something breaking open. In 3 days of lying still, he had heard his son plan asset transfers. He had heard his daughter negotiate around his funeral. He had heard his wife choose a house in Portugal. Not one of them had cried. Not one of them had sat in the quiet and simply felt the weight of losing him. Ada had come alone at night with a photograph. He had written his will 4 years ago with careful, deliberate hands. He had named his children, his wife, the charities that bore his father's name. He had been thorough and fair in the way that men are when they still believe fairness will be recognized. Lying in that room, listening to Ada cry in the dark, William understood something he should have understood long ago. Fairness had nothing to do with it. He had been leaving his life's work to the wrong people. It happened on the 4th day. Emmanuel had told him in the careful planning weeks before that William would feel it coming, a slow reversal like a tide returning. The sedative would begin releasing its hold gradually, sensation arriving back in layers. First sound, sharper than before. Then feeling fingers, then hands, then the full weight of a body that had been still too long. Then, when he was ready, the ability to move. What Emmanuel had not told him was how it would feel to choose the moment. William lay in the grey space between stillness and motion and listened one final time to the room around him. Early morning. The family had not yet arrived, it was just past 7, and none of them were people who kept early hours, especially not for someone they had already buried in their minds. A single nurse moved quietly in the corridor outside. Emmanuel would be arriving within the hour as he did each morning, unhurried and precise. The room was as quiet as it had been since the beginning. William decided he had heard enough. It started with his fingers. A slow curl, deliberate and private, the hand closing into a loose fist beneath the blanket where no one could see. Then his feet, a small shift, the sheets rustling almost imperceptibly. He breathed deeper once, twice, filling his lungs past the shallow rhythm of the past 4 days, and felt the oxygen mask shift with the movement. The monitor registered it immediately. The steady, measured lines spiked, not in alarm, not in crisis, but in the unmistakable pattern of a body waking up. The machine's voice changed. The slow, quiet pulse became something urgent, rhythmic, insistent. In 19 years of medicine, Emmanuel had calibrated that particular sound to mean one thing. He came through the door in under a minute. William heard him stop, heard the precise, controlled pause of a man who had planned this moment and was still, in spite of everything, startled by its arrival. Then Emmanuel moved to the bedside, and his voice, when it came, carried something that had not been in it during any of their careful, clinical planning sessions. Relief, genuine, unguarded relief. William opened his eyes. The light came in hard and bright, and he blinked against it slowly, the room assembling itself in pieces. The ceiling, the monitor, Emmanuel's face leaning over him with an expression that was equal parts professional composure and something far more human. Emmanuel straightened, turned to the nurse who had appeared in the doorway. And in a voice loud enough to carry, loud enough, William would think later, to reach every corridor in that wing, loud enough to interrupt whatever conversations were already beginning downstairs in the family waiting area where John and Helen had just arrived. Emmanuel said it clearly and without hesitation. He's alive. William closed his eyes again for just a moment. And for the first time in 4 days, he smiled. They had started with the study. William knew this because when Emmanuel drove him home 6 days later, quietly, through the side entrance, no announcement made, the first thing he noticed was that the dark wood shelving he had built into the eastern wall in 1998 was gone. In its place stood 2 large mood boards, fabric swatches pinned in careful rows, a designer's portfolio open on the desk that had been his father's before it was his. Helen was on the phone in the sitting room. Priscilla was measuring the windows. They did not hear him come in. He stood in the doorway of his own study for a moment and looked at the mood boards, the pale linens, the minimalist fixtures, the careful erasure of everything he had chosen, and felt something settle in him like concrete finding its level. Not anger, not anymore. Anger had burned through him in the hospital room and left something cleaner behind. Harder, more useful. He walked in. Helen heard him first. She turned from the window, phone still at her ear, and the blood left her face with a completeness that William found almost clinical. The phone dropped from her hand without her appearing to notice. Priscilla turned a half-second later, tape measure still extended between her fingers, and made a sound that was not quite a word. William set his jacket over the back of his chair in his study, and sat down. He gave them a moment, it seemed fair. William, Helen's voice arrived fractured, barely assembled. The doctors said Emmanuel told us. Emmanuel told you what I asked him to tell you, William said. His voice was even. He had no interest in drama. Drama was for people who needed the other person to feel something. William was past that now. Sit down, Helen. She sat. Priscilla hadn't moved. John appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. He had been upstairs. William would learn, reviewing the contents of the safe, and stopped as though he had walked into glass. William looked at his son, then his daughter, then his wife. I want to tell you something, and I want to say it once. No one spoke. I heard everything, every conversation, every plan, every phone call made in corridors you believed were private. He paused. The Cascais house, the Castellano dinner, the asset transfers, the lawyer you called quietly. His eyes moved to Helen. All of it. The room was absolutely still. I have already spoken to my legal team. The will has been revised. All three of you have been removed. He said it the way he had always made his most significant decisions, without theatre, without hesitation. The estate will be distributed according to the updated document. You will each receive what the law requires and nothing beyond it. John found his voice first. Dad, you can't. I already have, William said. He reached for the designer's portfolio on his desk, closed it with one hand and set it on the floor. Now, this is still my house. I'd like my study back.